In today's video, we're going to be talking about smear frames. So smear frames are one of my favorite subjects of animation. They're a lot of fun. I just wanted to make this video to, one, talk about one of my favorite subjects in animation, and two, to talk about what smear frames are and why they're actually very important to animation and why you shouldn't be pausing on them because they should be felt and not seen. A smear frame is something that you should feel in your animation. It shouldn't be something that visually you see in it. So first off, I wanted to show some examples of smear frames. Here you can see a whole collection on this Tumblr of smear frames from different cartoons. The idea behind a smear frame is it simulates a motion blur like on a video camera. But because animated frame-by-frame animation can't have real motion blur, we simulate it using either dry brush techniques or by smearing the cartoon out. One of my favorite examples of smear frames is from the cartoon short The Dover Boys, which is one of the first examples of smear frames being used. This cartoon is full of them, and because it was such an early exploration of animation, you can see it all over this cartoon. It's excessive to the point where it's hilarious. The Dover Boys has a lot of really good smear frames, and I actually participated in the Dover Boys Reanimated collab because it's one of my favorite cartoons of all time. Because we're going over smear frames, I thought my animation could be a good place to start. I wanted to kind of frame by frame through my shot and kind of show you what my smear frames look like. Here's the animation just in full. I'll play it a couple of times.
Hey, we're getting in a rut. Hey, we're getting in a rut. Hey, we're getting in a rut.
And now if we frame by frame through this animation, you can see he starts out fairly normal and then progressively he starts moving all over the screen, moving in all sorts of crazy ways. One really good example is this one right here. You might have not seen this drawing on its own. It might have just flashed by in a motion of color before it squashed up into this insane drawing up here and then stretches back down into this pose here. So I use smear frames all over the place here. You can see his chin kind of moves independently of his skull and he smears all over the screen before settling into place. So this is an excessive example of smear frames, but I wanted to show it because I think it's a lot of fun and I think it shows how you can use smear frames to add a lot of personality to your animation. You can also use smear frames in very subtle ways. In this acting shot I have here, you can see that it's very reserved. It's not over-the-top, zany, cartoony, but there's still some subtle animation smears happening where the character gets stretched out in between a frame. So I'm going to draw some examples of what you can do with a smear frame and how I tend to think about smear frames when I'm drawing them. The first rule of thumb with the smear frame is it should only last on your animation for one frame. A smear frame should not last for 2 frames because then you start to get to the point where the audience is going to be able to see it, and it's very important that your audience should not see the smear frame. It shouldn't be visually apparent. It should be something that is felt in your animation. So it's never a keyframe and it's never held in your animation for more than 1 frame. Here's the example we're going to animate to. So in this animation, I've actually taken out where I want to draw the smear frame. So you can see where our character disappears. We're going to draw those smear frames in, and I'll show you how I kind of think about smear frames. So here in this jumping example, we're going to go from him on the ground to him up in the air. So if we go to our 1 frame in the middle, turn on our onion skin, you can see the 2 frames that we're going to smear frame. One thing you can do is you can stretch out the character. So if we take each element of our character, let's start with the Pikachu hat. And also the head can get stretched out. Stretch out the facial features. Same on the Pikachu hat since it has a face on it as well. Stretch out the sleeve and the arm, the body, and his legs. And if we turn off our onion skin and flip back and forth, you can see what our smear frame looks like. So that's an example where we stretch out the character. And in this example, since I'm coming from the ground and going up in the air, I'm tending to favor the pose on the ground and stretching up that way. If we go forward to this drawing, turn on our onion skin, you can see we're going from the air down onto the ground. Now this drawing's a little bit different just because the Pikachu hat is actually floating up in the air. It's not going to stretch with our character. So for the Pikachu hat, I'm actually going to draw it still floating, favoring being up in the air. So I'm going to draw it kind of floating up here like this, not really deformed like our character's going to be. And I think for this one, I'm going to start with the arms. I'm going to stretch his fingers up like this. Stretch his sleeve out, get the torso stretched out. Same for his head, we'll stretch that out. Favor his expression from the previous drawing, since that's the one we're coming from. Stretch these fingers back here, out like that. And then stretch his socks out. And these drawings are a lot of fun. It almost feels like you're playing with putty a little bit. It's like you're taking your character and you're putting him through a putty roller. It's a lot of fun. So if we turn off our onion skin, that's what our drawing looks like. Maybe we could bring his shirt up a little bit, focus on exaggerating his legs a bit more. That's another thing too, is don't feel like you have to get your drawing right on the first go. If you flip back and forth and it just doesn't feel like it's stretching properly, don't be afraid to erase it and start over. Or just erase a part of your smear drawing that's not working and just redraw that part. And there we go, there's our two smear drawings. So we've got our first one and we've got our second one. And obviously if we frame by frame through it really slowly, you're going to notice it and it's going to look kind of funny. But check this out, here's what it looks like when it's fully rendered. So here's our animation fully completed. You probably notice it as the animator because you just drew it, but chances are somebody just watching for fun at a glance is probably not going to see those drawings. They're probably more going to feel that the character's being squishy. If some parts are sticking out, like for me looking at it, maybe his hand gets a little bit too deformed, I might refine that, but I hope you can recognize that the smear drawings that we just did, because they're only for one frame long, they're adding to the expressiveness of this animation. It's making this otherwise just regular jump up and down feel a lot more lively. It makes it more interesting. I think that's one of the things I want to implore to you, is that stuff like this makes your animation interesting. Don't be afraid to mess around with the model. You know, don't be afraid to stretch things out, to morph things around if it makes it more fun. To a point, you don't want to do a Dover Boys and just have them smearing everywhere. Smears should be used for a good reason, usually a fast action or motion. And also, you know, dangerously, you could use a smear to just lazily get from one pose to another, but I would not recommend that. It looks lazy. I would only use smears as a way to add on to your already good-looking animation. So that's one example of a smear, is stretching out your character. Let's move on to our second example. In this next example, I want to talk about multiples. So you may have seen in the earlier examples that we showed that sometimes you'd see extra eyeballs or you'd see extra digits on a finger. These are called multiples in a smear frame, and it's another really fun tool that we can use in our smear frames. So in this example, what we have so far without our smear frames is this. Just a take where our character shows a lot of affection to something happening off screen to the screen right. So I thought this would be a really fun thing to add a smear frame to. This is called a take in animation, where a character will do a really expressive expression. So that's what we're going to do here. So our smear frame, which again only lasts for one frame, is going to occur in between these two drawings right here. So I thought the hearts would be a really fun way to do multiple drawings. So we turned on the onion skin for our previous example, right? But that's not actually the way I prefer to do smear frames. I prefer to leave the onion skin off and just flip back and forth from one to the other and sort of feel where the smear frame needs to go. So if I were to take my sketch brush and just kind of track one part at a time and sort of feel where they need to go, the drawings will kind of tell you where they need to go, and you just gotta put a line down, see if that follows where your mind's eye is telling you it needs to go. And if it's not, take your lasso tool, select it, and move it where it needs to be. So for his head, kind of starts out right there, ends up about over there. If I turn it into sort of a jelly bean shape for that smear, maybe give it a little bit more volume over here, draw his other heart eye right here. And then for the Pikachu hat, just a blur of yellow from one side to the other. Follow the line of action for his ears. Be dragging behind kind of like that. And his torso starts about here, ends up over here. And I'm not going fully all the way. When I'm stretching out these body parts, I'm not fully going to where the next frame is. I'm kind of going about 80% of the way there. And then for his hand, have his fingers really stretch and drag behind. Same for this hand, we'll have it really stretch into place. And that feels pretty good. Good enough for a really rough sketch. We did that super quick. So now what we can do is we can take our final line work and draw our final smear frame here. So we started out by stretching things just like we did before, but now let's have some fun with it. For his heart eyes, let's add like 3 of them. And we'll add an extra one for his screen right eye as well. Again, kind of flipping back and forth, just seeing what feels right. The drawings kind of tell you what feels right when you flip back and forth. I like that, so let's have that many hearts going from left to right. And then another spot where we can do multiples is these fingers right here. So this hand going up to his face, we could have 1, 2, he's supposed to have 3, but let's give him 4, 5 fingers like that. That might be excessive, but I want to have fun with it. I kind of want to just have fun with these smear frames, you know? They're supposed to be silly, goofy fun time. And again, because they only last for one frame, it should feel like a motion blur. And then on this hand, a really fun thing we can do with that hand is we could draw one hand here with its fingers dragging behind and another hand up here. And we can have one hand stay attached to the body and the other one just kind of floating off into space. Sometimes on some animes you'll see that kind of thing, where you'll see a character have multiple body parts just kind of floating off into space, not really attached to the body anymore. It's a really fun thing to experiment with. And then let's just finish out the rest of these body parts, just feeling what feels good for our final line work. The Pikachu up here would be a great candidate for multiples as well. Maybe give him 2 noses. Have his mouth really stretch out and drag behind. And then here's another really good spot we could do multiples is the ears on the hat. Doesn't have to have 2 ears. We could do a third one up here to kind of help move that movement along. And for his mouth here, we could just sort of fill it in, stretch it out just like that. Have his eyebrow connect from the previous eyebrow up to the next one. A little bit of shadow for the hat underneath. And just follow the movements of the body just like this. All right, and let's fill in our hearts with color. Do the same with the Pikachu hat. And you don't have to go this extreme with it either. I'm going extreme just for the sake of the video, but you could just smear one part of the body and that would be fine. Some of that depends on style, but I would argue it doesn't really matter what the style of your animation is. I feel like smear frames can be really beneficial no matter how realistic or how serious your animation is supposed to be. Alright, and if we get rid of our sketch layer here, maybe flipping through it, maybe add another heart here. You can kind of tell where things need to be just by flipping back and forth through it. So if we play it through, that's what our animation looks like. So here it is fully rendered. Now, I'll bet watching through this, you probably didn't even notice that there's an extra hand or extra ears on it, right? It just kind of blends in because it just looks like one big fast motion. So again, I'm going to repeat. These drawings should be felt and not seen. If you don't see a smear frame when you play back your animation, that means you're doing it right. So really, they're just there to simulate motion blurs in a really fast motion. And they're just so fun to draw. I really wanted to show you guys what they were because they're just a blast. They're a lot of fun to animate and experiment with. I hope you guys have found this helpful. I had a lot of fun making this tutorial. Again, it's one of my favorite subjects, and I really encourage you to experiment with smear frames. These animations will be available in the description below. You can take these animations and draw your own smear frames if you'd like to experiment with my animation and just try out drawing your own smear frames. Thanks for checking out this video. As always, keep on animating, and until next time, bye-bye! Be sure to click here to subscribe to my channel to stay updated on future videos and tutorials. If you'd like to help support my work, you can click here to visit my Patreon page. You also get access to rewards like early access to tutorials, source animation files, and access to a secret Patreon-only chat room. Keep on animating, and until next time, bye-bye!